All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We're finally tackling those Yoga Sutras, starting at the very beginning.
Sutra 1.1.
Yeah, 1.1. And we're working with that 1924 English translation, right? The one with all those ancient commentaries.
That's right. We're going to go deep.
We are. Beyond just a basic translation, we're going to really try to understand, the deeper philosophical meaning of it all.
Exactly.
So by the end of this deep dive, you're not only going to know, what the sutra says, but what it means to you, like in your own understanding of yoga.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get started. So first, let's just look at the sutra itself.
Okay, so in Sanskrit, it's Atha Yoga Shasanam.
Okay. And what's that in English?
Now, a revised text of yoga.
Short and sweet.
Yeah, very much so. But like you said, I think we're going to find there's a lot more to it.
It's deceptively simple.
It is. Like the tip of the iceberg. All this, depth of knowledge underneath.
Right.
And that's where the commentaries come in,
Yeah.
Give us these different perspectives on what it means.
Great. So let's start with that 7th century commentator, Vyasa. What did he have to say about this seemingly simple sutra?
Well, Vyasa makes the point that now isn't talking about, like, a specific time, but it signifies a new undertaking.
Okay.
It's like Patanjali is saying, listen up, this is where we begin,
Okay. Like a declaration of intent.
Exactly. Setting the stakes.
Okay. I like it.
And then he goes on to define yoga as contemplation.
Okay. Samadhi, right.
Samadhi, yeah.
Deep focus. But Vyasa says that's not the whole story, right?
Right. He introduces 5 different planes of the mind.
5.
Yeah, from a totally wandering mind all the way to a completely restrained mind, like, a whole spectrum of mental states.
Okay. Interesting. So how do those 5 planes connect to the idea of contemplation?
Well, he says that each plane, leads to different types of contemplation. But here's the big thing. Only the contemplation that comes from a one-pointed mind is considered real yoga.
Okay. So, like, if I'm contemplating something, doesn't that mean I'm focused no matter what? Like, what's the difference?
It's about the quality of your focus. Like if your mind is wandering, or forgetful, even if you're trying to contemplate something, that contemplation is going to be, messed up by distractions.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You need that unwavering focus to really, get deep into it.
Exactly. And to clarify this further, Vyasa distinguishes between 2 different types of samadhi.
Okay. 2 types.
Cognitive and ultra-cognitive.
Okay. So what's the difference? What makes them different, and how do those relate back to having a one-pointed mind?
Okay, so cognitive samadhi is what we might think of as focused meditation.
Yeah.
Where you're concentrating on something specific, an object or idea.
Okay.
You're still thinking, but it's very directed.
Right. Like focused.
Yeah. And ultra-cognitive samadhi goes even deeper. It's a state of pure awareness, like beyond thought completely.
Beyond thought.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that sounds really peaceful. How do you even get there?
Well, it's a process.
Yeah.
Refining your awareness.
Yeah.
Stilling those mental fluctuations. And that's really where the practice of yoga comes in. It helps us cultivate that focus.
That one-pointed focus. Right. So that was Vyasa's perspective. Now, let's jump ahead a few centuries to Vachaspati Mishra's commentary. This was in the 9th century. How did he build on these ideas?
Well, Mishra also looks at the meaning of now, but he emphasizes its connection to, like, teaching, highlighting that the sutras are actively transmitting knowledge.
So it's not just like presenting information, but it's more like guiding us.
Exactly. And he also explains why it says revised text.
Right.
Because Patanjali wasn't the first to teach yoga,
Right.
He was building on what came before him, refining it.
So it's like the updated version.
Exactly. And Mishra really clarifies the definition of yoga.
Yeah.
He goes beyond just contemplation. He says it's ultimately about restraining those mental modifications.
The vrittis.
Right, the vrittis, yeah. So it's not just about focusing your mind, but like gaining control over all those thoughts, emotions, and distraction.
Exactly. Cultivating stillness.
And this is where Mishra introduces the concept of siddha, right?
He does.
Mind stuff.
Mind stuff, yeah. Or, the will to know. It's a deeper level of awareness than just, the thinking mind.
Okay, so it's more holistic.
Exactly. And he's saying that yoga is about working with the siddha,
Yeah.
refining it, purifying it, so that it becomes a clear instrument.
I'm really starting to see how much depth these commentaries add to this one short sutra.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into the specifics of each of those 5 planes of the mind, what are some key takeaways you think the listeners should be thinking about at this point?
Well, first, this first sutra, it's not just a definition. It's a declaration, of intent,
It's a start of this whole journey.
an invitation to explore. Right.
Exactly. And the commentaries emphasize that yoga, the way Patanjali's talking about it, it's not just any kind of contemplation.
Right.
It's a very specific type. It requires a disciplined mind.
And understanding those 5 planes of the mind, like Vyasa and Mishra were talking about, that's really important, to figure out where we are on that spectrum.
Exactly. It gives you a starting point.
Yeah.
So as we go forward, think about your own mental state.
Yeah.
Where does your mind usually fall in that spectrum?
That's a great question. A good thing to reflect on as we keep going.
It is.
Okay, let's take a moment to, absorb all that, and then we'll come back and really break down those 5 planes of the mind. All right, so we've established that Sutra 1.1 is, laying the groundwork for understanding yoga. And Vyasa and Mishra's commentaries have given us some really key insights into its meaning.
Yeah, it's amazing how much depth they add.
I know. So now let's dive into those 5 planes of the mind that they were talking about. I'm really curious to learn more about these different states of awareness and how they relate to practicing yoga.
Yeah, they're really fascinating. It's a framework for understanding how our minds work. And they highlight the challenges we face when, we try to cultivate that really focused, serene state.
Okay, so let's go through them one by one. Let's start with the first one, the wandering mind, or kshipta.
Okay.
I think we can all relate to that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The wandering mind. It's characterized by constant movement.
Yeah.
Jumping from one thought to the next, without any real focus.
Right. Scattered, easily distracted.
Yeah, exactly. Our attention is all over the place. It's like trying to meditate in a whirlwind.
Right. So how does that affect our ability to actually practice yoga?
Well, imagine trying to hold, a yoga pose when your mind is like that. It's hard to balance, focus on your breath, connect to those subtle sensations in your body.
Right. Yeah. It's like you need that foundation of, stability to really make any progress. Okay, so let's move on to the second one. The forgetful mind, or mudha.
Okay. Mutha is characterized by dullness, inertia, a lack of clarity. It's like, you're in a mental fog.
Yeah, like when you're tired, haven't slept enough.
Exactly. And this dullness, it makes it really hard to, really engage with anything, let alone delve into the subtleties of yoga.
So how's that different from the wandering mind? I mean, they both seem to involve a lack of focus, right?
Yeah, good point. They both lack clarity, but the difference is the energy.
Okay.
The wandering mind is restless, agitated, always searching for something. But the forgetful mind, it's more passive, lethargic. It's like it doesn't have the energy to really engage.
So it's like the difference between, a noisy, crowded room and like a dark, empty room.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Both distracting, but in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've explored those 2 extremes, right? The scattered, restless, wandering mind, and then the dull, kind of inert, forgetful mind. Now let's move to the middle ground, the occasionally steady mind, or vikshipta.
Okay, yeah. Vikshipta is where we start to see some focus, some clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Amidst all that mental chatter, it's like the clouds parting and you get these glimpses of sunshine.
Okay, so it's not like constant, but it's more like those flashes of awareness.
Yeah. We can concentrate for a bit, have some insights, but they're often interrupted. It's like you're starting to control the horse, but it still has a tendency to want to run off.
So how do we cultivate more of those moments of steadiness? Like, how do we move beyond just those fleeting glimpses?
Well, this is where the practice of yoga really comes in. Through consistent effort, we can strengthen our ability to focus, learn to observe our thoughts without judging them, and gradually we cultivate a more stable, peaceful state of mind.
So it's like training a muscle.
Exactly. The more we practice focusing our attention, the stronger it gets, and we can hold that steady mind for longer.
So before we go on to the one-pointed mind, the ekagra mind, I'm just curious, where do you think most people fall on this spectrum of, mental states?
I'd say most people are probably somewhere in between those first 3 planes, moving back and forth between distraction, dullness, and those occasional moments of clarity.
Yeah.
It's just, the nature of the human mind. It's constantly changing. But that's what's great about yoga. It gives us tools to navigate that.
Right. Right. So it's not about being perfectly still all the time. It's more about learning to work with, the ups and downs of our mind.
Exactly. And as we get to the one-pointed and the restrained mind, we'll see how this self-awareness and, skillful engagement with our mental processes lead to some really transformative experiences.
Okay. I'm ready to explore those. Let's talk about the one-pointed mind, the ekagra mind. We already touched on its importance in relation to true yoga, but what does it actually feel like to experience that kind of focus?
Well, the one-pointed mind is this state of deep concentration, where your attention is fully absorbed in whatever you're focusing on. It's like a laser beam cutting through all the distractions.
So not just blocking out distractions, but directing your attention with, like, precision.
Exactly. And in this state, you experience a profound sense of clarity, stillness, inner peace. The mental chatter fades away, and you're left with this pure awareness of the present moment.
That's incredible. But is that something that, like, takes years of practice to achieve?
It takes effort and dedication, but it's not impossible. The key is to start small. Gradually train your mind to focus for longer and longer.
So it's like any skill. The more you practice, the better you get.
Exactly. And even those brief moments of one-pointedness, they can make a big difference.
Right. Okay. So it's not just about reaching some far off goal. It's about, feeling those benefits of focus in our daily lives.
Absolutely. And as we move to that fifth and final plane, the restrained mind, we'll see how this cultivation of focus leads to a state where you're completely free from all those mental fluctuations.
All right. I want to hear about that state of liberation. Let's explore that fifth plane, the restrained mind, the Naruda. How is that different from the one-pointed mind?
Okay, so the restrained mind, it's like the peak of yoga practice, complete mastery over the mind.
Wow.
The one-pointed mind is focused attention, but the restrained mind goes even beyond that.
Okay.
It's pure, effortless awareness. The mind is totally still.
A mind completely free from, like, any thoughts or distractions?
Yeah, it's a state of pure bliss, pure liberation. It's where the true self, the seer, shines through completely unobstructed.
So it's like reaching the top of a mountain after a long climb.
Exactly. It's ultimate freedom. You're no longer bound by, your thoughts and emotions.
That sounds pretty amazing, but I imagine it takes a lifetime of practice to achieve that.
It's a high goal, for sure. But remember, even the journey itself is transformative. Every step you take toward, cultivating a more focused and peaceful mind, it brings you closer to those glimpses of liberation.
So even if we never reach that ultimate state, of complete restraint, the practice of yoga is still so valuable just to help us, handle everyday life.
Absolutely. And as we go through the sutras, you'll find all sorts of techniques and insights that can help us cultivate these states of mind and experience the power of yoga.
Okay, so we've gone through these 5 planes of the mind, and I can see how they give us a framework for understanding, the challenges and possibilities on this yogic path. But before we move on to Sutra 1.2, I want to go back to something you mentioned before about those brief moments of one-pointedness, how they can benefit us even if we're not, experts at meditation. Can you talk more about that? Like, how can we integrate these insights into our everyday lives with all the, busyness and distractions?
That's a great question. And it reminds us that yoga isn't just about sitting and meditating for hours. It's about bringing that awareness and focus into everything we do.
So finding those moments of stillness, even in the middle of chaos.
Exactly. It could be as simple as taking a few deep breaths before you start work, or really paying attention to the taste of your food when you eat, or just noticing the feeling of your feet on the ground as you walk.
So it's about being mindful, even in those, ordinary moments.
Exactly. And as we cultivate that mindful attention, those moments of one-pointedness, they start to happen more naturally.
Okay, so it's about integrating those principles into our lives, rather than seeing them as something separate or, impossible to achieve.
Exactly. And as we continue exploring the sutras, we'll see more and more techniques and insights that can support us in that.
All right. I'm excited to keep going. Now let's move on to Sutra 1.2 and see how Patanjali builds on what we've learned so far. We've come a long way with Sutra 1.1, exploring those 5 planes of the mind, and why yoga requires that focused awareness.
Yeah, it's like we've laid the foundation for what yoga really is.
Right.
And now, Sutra 1.2 builds on that. It gets to the heart of the practice itself.
Okay, let's hear it. What does 1.2 say?
In Sanskrit, it's yoga shadida vetinurata.
And in English?
Yoga is the restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff.
Okay, so now we're talking about actively working with the mind.
Exactly. Not just contemplation. It's about restraining those fluctuations, those vriddhis we were talking about.
So taking the reins and, steering it where we want it to go.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And Vyasa, in his commentary, he points out that this restraint isn't about, like, suppressing your thoughts.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing them, observing them without judgment, and letting them go.
So not forcing our minds to be blank, but just learning to relate to our thoughts in a different way.
Exactly, like watching clouds drift by. You don't try to stop the clouds. You just watch them.
Right, right. That
Yeah.
makes it seem a lot more doable.
Yeah. And Vyasa also connects this to the kleshas,
The kleshas.
the afflictions, that cloud our perception.
Right, the things that cause suffering. Can you remind us what those are?
Sure. So there's ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and the fear of death.
Right.
And they're like the root of our suffering.
Okay, yeah.
And Vyasa is saying that when we restrain those modifications, we weaken the grip of those afflictions too.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
You're calming the mental chatter, but you're also addressing the root of the problem.
Now, Vachaspati Mishra, he takes this idea even further.
Okay.
He talks about how this restraint leads to a state of pure awareness, where you can experience your true self.
So it's not just about quieting the mind for peace, but for a deeper purpose.
Yeah. He's suggesting it leads to a profound shift in consciousness, a direct experience of who you truly are.
And he uses that analogy of the lake, right?
He does. He says, when the surface of the lake is all choppy and turbulent, it's hard to see what's beneath.
Right.
But as the waves subside and the water becomes still, then you can see the depths clearly.
Ah, so those mental modifications are like the waves, and when we calm them, we can finally see our true self.
Exactly. And both Vyasa and Mishra, they emphasize this isn't passive.
Right.
It takes real effort, dedication, a willingness to confront those patterns and habits that, keep the mind so active.
So more like training for a marathon, not just a casual walk.
Exactly. Discipline, perseverance, commitment.
So Sutra 1.2 and its commentaries really highlight what yoga is truly about, right?
It is.
It's not just the poses or the breathing. It's about mastering the mind.
And that mastery isn't about controlling the mind. It's about understanding it,
Right.
observing it, responding to it skillfully.
So ultimately, it's about having a healthier relationship with our own minds.
Beautifully put. Moving from reacting to responding.
Okay, before we move on to 1.3, I want to ask the listeners, if yoga is about restraining the modifications of the mind, what steps can you take in your life to cultivate that stillness? What practices resonate with you? What challenges come up?
Those are great questions to consider. Because Sutra 1.3, gives us a glimpse of what awaits us when we do meet those challenges.
Let's find out. What does Sutra 1.3 say?
It's Tara Svarupe Vastanam.
Okay, and in English?
Then the seer rests in its own true nature.
Wow, that's powerful. It feels like a promise of what's possible when we achieve that restraint.
It is. The sutra is all about the state we reach when we quiet those mental fluctuations. It's like the fruit of all that practice we talked about in 1.2.
So this is the destination.
Exactly. When the mind is still, the seer, the true self, shines through.
And Vyasa explains that the seer is always there, right?
Always.
It's just usually hidden by all that mental noise.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like the sun is always shining even behind the clouds.
Right.
And yoga is about clearing away those clouds so we can experience that radiance.
So when the seer rests in its true nature, what does that actually feel like?
Well, the commentaries describe it as a state of profound peace, clarity, freedom,
Okay.
being fully present, awake to the truth of your own being.
And Mishra adds that in this state, we're not identifying with our thoughts and emotions anymore. We become the observer.
Exactly. He uses a great analogy. Imagine you're sitting on the bank of a river, watching the water flow by.
Okay.
You see leaves, twigs, all kinds of stuff being carried by the current. But you don't jump in and grab them.
Right.
You just observe them. You know they're not you.
So our thoughts and emotions are like those passing objects.
Exactly. And when we cultivate that detached observation, we experience freedom. We're not controlled by our thoughts and feelings anymore.
Not just along for the ride.
Exactly. We can choose how we respond. And Mishra also says this state, it's not something you just achieve once and that's it.
Right.
It's an ongoing process, continually refining your awareness.
So those mental modifications, they're going to come back.
Oh, they will. The practice is to keep returning to that stillness. Keep refining that ability to observe, keep choosing peace.
Sutra 1.3 really paints a beautiful picture of the goal of yoga, that state of being where we're truly present, awake to who we really are.
It's a journey of transformation, unveiling that light within.
We started this whole deep dive with a pretty simple sutra, now a revised text of yoga.
And look where we ended up. We explored the mind, the practice, the goal of it all.
I know. From a simple phrase to this profound understanding of yoga. And I think the biggest takeaway is that this wisdom isn't just theoretical, It's something we can really experience.
It is. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. We've talked about the seer resting in its true nature. But what does that really feel like? What qualities emerge when the mind is still?
That's a great question to think about as you continue to explore the sutras and as you go about your day.
Exactly.
What a beautiful invitation to bring this wisdom to life, and discover that peace and clarity for ourselves. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Sutra 1.1. We'll be back soon to explore even more of the Yoga Sutras.